Hey guys, it's Etor. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to ask you something. What's your story? We all have one, and sometimes it takes the right space and a little guidance to bring that story to life. That's why I created the Ink and Authenticity Men's Creative Writing Workshop. It's a unique space for men to explore their identities, reflect on personal experiences, and use writing as a tool for self-discovery. Whether you're an experienced writer or have never written a word, this workshop is for you. Join me and other like-minded men on this journey. Visit authenticityroad.online/workshop to learn more. Thanks. And now on to today's episode. What is the intersection of masculinity and compassion? In a world where men are often conditioned to be tough and unemotional, our guest, Sean Harvey, sheds light on a different path. Sean, a visionary in blending masculine strength with the power of vulnerability, invites us to rethink what it truly means to be a man in today's world, especially for those men operating within hypermasculine systems, from the staunchly traditional military and law enforcement to the gleaming towers of Wall Street. We'll dive deep into his groundbreaking approach from his book, Warrior Compassion, exploring how Sean's personal experiences have shaped his mission to heal and empower men. As we navigate these discussions, we'll uncover the transformative power of embracing both masculine and feminine energies, breaking down barriers, and fostering a space where men can openly express compassion and empathy. Please join Jordan and me on this inspiring journey. We're about to open the doors to a new understanding of masculinity, one that champions emotional health and wholeness. So let's get on the road. Welcome to the Authenticity Road podcast.
We started this podcast to share our stories and hear from others about their adventures in men's work.
Join us on the journey to our fully authentic selves, emotional healing, and the meaning of modern masculinity.
Here on Authenticity Road.
Hello, and welcome to the Authenticity Road podcast. I'm Etor.
I'm Jordan.
And this week on the podcast, we are thrilled to be welcoming Sean Harvey. Sean Harvey is Chief Compassion Officer and founder of the Warrior Compassion Men's Studio and the Symphonia Facilitator Studio. He contributes to men's work communities around the globe and is passionate about helping men heal their wounds at a soul level to begin to love the truth of who they are. Sean has served on the faculties of Cornell, NYU, and Baruch College at the City University of New York, and he is affiliated with George Washington University's Center for Excellence in Public Leadership. He joins us today as the author of a new book, Warrior Compassion: Unleashing the Healing Power of Men. Warrior Compassion offers a roadmap for men's soul healing as a catalyst for systems change. Sean is the holder of multiple degrees from notable institutions and is an ordained minister. There is so much more I could tell you about Sean's history, extraordinary journey, and accomplishments, but I will let him hit on the high points as we get into our conversation. Sean, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the show.
No, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Before we jump in, I just have to clear up one thing that is driving me up a wall, and that is, why are you one of my Facebook friends? So I don't remember which one of us friended the other. I don't know if I friended you or you did it to me. All I know is one day you were my friend, and then the next thing I knew, you had a book, and it was a book about men's work. And I'm like, well, this guy obviously belongs in my friends list, but how the heck did you get there? Do you have any recollection? That is hilarious. I mean, because I don't generally reach out to people unless they know me, because I feel awkward. And so I'm finding it difficult to believe that I actually reached out to you. And then I don't know why you would have reached out to me, because I'm a nobody. But here we are. And I kind of feel like it was fate. I sort of feel like it was like this kismet thing where we needed to know each other, and we do. And now you're here. So that's just one of those awesome meant to be kind of things. So the name of your book is Warrior Compassion. And I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about what that means. What is warrior compassion?
When I was when I first started working on the book, I was in a book writers program out of Georgetown, and my TED Talk was called "Compassion Makes the Warrior." A lot of my work now is with police and military defense. I'm working with men in hypermasculine systems, and so thinking about what book title would draw in that audience. And so I thought, Compassion Makes the Warrior. Georgetown said, no. And I'm like, okay, why? There's too many words. I'm like, it's 4 words. They're like, no, too many words. So I said, well, it could be Compassionate Warrior. And they said, or what about Warrior Compassion? And so I had to sit with it for a minute. And when I started thinking about the difference between it's an identity that you can take on versus an energy that you can access. And so warrior compassion really being this fierce energy within each of us that when we start doing our healing work and start to get beyond the protective layers, and we can start to love the parts of ourselves we've either rejected or that are surrounded by shame or coming from a place of wounding, that provides an opportunity for a fierce energy of healing from that place of compassion. So that's really where it started, and bringing that level of compassion and healing to men who don't typically have access to it or even know it's available.
Yeah. So how does a warrior approach to compassion differ from maybe the ways that we're taught to be compassionate or the ways that a more female energy expresses compassion? What is that difference?
As I talk to men across a number of different communities, they're already practicing compassion, be it protection, be it how they connect with their animals, with their dogs, how they volunteer, or how they will look out for someone else.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's I'm very intentional about language, and I often will pick diametrically opposed ideas or concepts and bring them together to say what happens. I think a lot of this work for men is, you can call it integrating in the masculine and feminine, you can call it integrating in the yin and yang, but really just that work of integrating into our full humanity.
Yeah.
And moving out of the imbalance, right?
Yeah.
And what happens when we become fully integrated? And so that whole notion of compassionate warrior, where I began, was to blend the masculine and feminine, for lack of a better terminology.
Right.
And what happens when we're able to, and what I say today is balance strength and tenderness. And what does that look like?
Right.
When we're able to access that. But I think so few men, many men are just, it's challenged to go to that place of the feminine or go to that place of, to really feel compassion versus, so I make the distinction of intellectualizing compassion or idealizing compassion when it's convenient versus viscerally experiencing compassion and giving and receiving compassion in every interaction. And so I think that is the practice. How do I demonstrate compassion for each interaction that I have? How do I express compassion for my greatest adversary? And how do I express compassion for myself?
Yeah.
And so ultimately, this book is helping men learn to love in a new way. And what I often say is it's moving from an intellectualized or bastardized version of love with conditions to the visceral experience of unconditional love.
Yeah.
And then what is the possibility when we're actually able to operate from that place of viscerally experienced unconditional love to be able to both give it and receive it. And that when we lead, when we think about systems, when we think about our relationships, that we're coming from that place of a deep and truthful love.
And I guess the first question that comes to me is, how do I do that? What do I as a guy, like knowing how men are brought up in our society and understanding how we get pushed into the man box, right? How do I begin? What exercises do I use to begin to move in that way?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey guys, it's Ator again. Sorry to interrupt the show, but I want to tell you about something I'm really excited about. If you've been listening for a while, you know how important it is to take time for self-reflection and growth. That's exactly why I've created the Ink and Authenticity Men's Creative Writing Workshop. This is a 6-session online workshop designed specifically for men. Whether you're looking to explore your identity, challenge societal expectations, or simply find a creative outlet to process your life, this workshop gives you the space to do that. It's not about being a professional writer. It's about telling your story, digging deep, and connecting with others on the same journey. Each session is filled with prompts and discussions that will help you understand yourself better, all in a supportive and open environment. So if you want a way to write, reflect, and share, join me for Ink and Authenticity. Just visit authenticityroad.online/workshop to learn more and register. Now let's get back to the show.
The way my book is broken out, it first looks at the case for why this is important. Mm-hmm. And so you can look at any statistic and we're just surpassing women around suicide, addiction, violence, any number, depression, trauma, what it looks like for men versus what it looks like for women. And I think for a lot of men, there's just not access or the stigma. So it's either access, knowing it's available, or the stigmas around what this is that often prevent men from engaging in the deeper work. I break it down in my book from, we're going to look at our wounds, we're going to look at healing. We really first have to get anchored before we're even ready for this. Like what should anchor someone to be a man to be able to even go into this journey, right? Yeah. So I make the case for this work in the upfront. Then I share my journey of how I went through what I call the soul adventure. That really started when I left Wall Street and college teaching, went to work for Eileen Fisher, the women's fashion company. Was sent to an artist commune in Canada for 5 months to learn how to incorporate the arts and creative facilitation. And then from there, was around a lot of spiritual teachers in the company and wrote an article for the Journal of Management, Religion and Spirituality on nurturing the soul of the company at Eileen Fisher. So all of that was like leading me when I really heard the call to work with men. First of all, I didn't want to. I mean, I never chose this. And I think most of us who are really in it for the long haul, we didn't choose it. It chose us. Mm-hmm. It's a calling. Yeah. And so, I left Wall Street to never have to work with men again. And so I thought it was, just comedic that then I got the call, oh no, you're going to work with men. And what I noticed at Eileen Fisher was I would talk to men in the company, and I would, the company was built on feminine energy, a feminine leadership model, and men were being transformed. And when I would talk to them, I'd say, hey, I feel like I'm changing. Are you changing? And they would say, yeah. And it would always start with my wife said or my girlfriend said. So my wife said, I'm more patient. I listen differently. I stopped needing to be right all the time. I started to be more curious. I started to express myself more fully in my emotions. I started to connect with my creativity differently, and I was solving problems differently. I was making space for those who don't look like me. But most important, most significant was again and again, I feel more comfortable in my own skin. And I said, we need to take this out. There were 200 men out of 1,200 employees in the company. So we need to take this out to more men.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I'm getting back to your question. So I really unpacked my story, my journey, and teased out all the different steps that were in my journey that I thought could be helpful for men as an inquiry. I'm not saying this is the way forward, because I think we often talk about men as a monolith, and we are very complex. And what works for you may not work for me. So let's be in an inquiry as opposed to here's the way forward. I think the first, the way I break it down in my book, the first thing we do is we find safety in the community of men. Because and the way I describe it is when you can feel safe enough in a group of men to ugly cry in front of each other and be held, that's first and foremost. Because I think so many men are operating from this place of, we can see the loneliness epidemic, the isolation epidemic. A lot of men are operating from a terminal uniqueness that I'm the only one, because they're not talking about what's really up for them. And so to be able to first find community with men where they can start to really hear each other and share what's going on for them at a deeper level. Then second, I say, and then to start seeing the world with childlike wonder. And so how to help men start to rediscover play and give themselves permission to play. Because I think part of bringing down the mask, one of the quickest ways in is creativity and play. So that's the second. Then to activate curiosity, to be able to step into vulnerability. And then the big one, to be able to surrender into the unknown and let go of control.
Yeah.
And I think that's the anchoring work before you can even start looking at the wounds that we have as men, so that you're not going into automatic defense from the ego in terms of self-protection, and you're able to take more risks and put yourself out there and really look at the parts of yourself that you don't want to see.
I think I speak for a lot of men. We have a tendency that once we decide we want something, we kind of want it now, right? We want the 3 easy steps to get what we want, the fast track. And I want to go back to what you said about balancing strength and tenderness, and taking into account the group of men that you work with now, the military, law enforcement, that kind of array of people. What surprises you when you see very masculine men step into this compassion and tenderness?
It's already there. It's already there. I think what we're doing as we welcome people back home to themselves, the truth of who they are, is that we're really reminders and reflections of each other's humanity. And so when I was a professor, I'd always say, I'm not teaching you rocket science. I'm teaching common sense practices that aren't commonly practiced. And so what I find most both surprising and enjoyable is to see when men feel safe to be able to start opening up, what they're already doing. What are their expressions of compassion that they're already living? I think we often in this work, or when we talk about men and masculinity, we're making a lot of assumptions that men are starting from ground zero.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, we're, how you were raised, your values, your principles, your faith, all of these are contributing to already being compassionate. It might be that the way we're conditioned is holding us back from the full expression of how we could be compassionate, or we're still getting stuck in compare and despair, or comparison. We're getting stuck in, how we've played the game, or we're getting stuck in, I played the game like a competitive field, or I'm playing into a narrative that I can't be vulnerable. And all of these things, I think, are just, keeping men. And what I often say is, this book is written for men who suffer in silence, which is AKA a lot of men,
Right.
across a lot of different backgrounds.
Totally.
Right. And, when we were coming up with the title of the book, the folks at Georgetown said, yeah, as they were looking at my initial ideas in my initial writing, it's like, you're not talking about, with so many men that are hearing the message they have to change because something's broken or they are broken. Yeah, that's all that's all off the table. It's that, well, here's an invitation to heal because you might be wounded because you're human. And you may just not have had the tools or the access or the coping skills to be able to know how to navigate that. Or you're bypassing it because you think you can handle it, right? You're not aware of what the consequences in your relationships, and the way you lead, and the way you show up in the world, the way you view the world. And so I just believe that, this work is really creating an invitation for liberation. And at the same time, as I look at kind of where we are in the gender conversation, where we are in the man and masculinity conversation, how do we help men navigate without emasculating them in the process? Right? So they may tap into that feminine energy. They may tap into their whole selves. But how do we do it in a way? Because what I often see in men's work is either we're going to take a hypermasculine approach and beat your emotions out of you, or take a hyperfeminine approach and demonize the masculine. So you really aren't coming into that integration. And so I think it really is, how do we look at this from a place of healing? How do we look at this from a place of integration? How do we look at this from an inquiry, not I have the way forward? And ultimately, as you said earlier, helping men discover the truth of who they are. By asking the questions, not giving the advice.
Yeah.
Yeah. We like doing that.
Yeah, I hear you.
So, Sean, what I didn't say at the outset of the show, and I very much should have, is that I really enjoyed the book. I really did enjoy it. And I liked all of it. It's basically divided into 3 sections. And as much as I loved sections 2 and 3, I have to say I really, really loved the first section where you talk about your story. Because your story is just so rich and so unique and so touching and so specific to, well, if someone is going to become the guy who comes up with this, he would have to go through all of this stuff first. Right. And you did. And so, the stuff with your dad was really touching. The part of it about working at Eileen Fisher, my day job is in a women-led company. And so I identified with so much of what you said about working with Eileen Fisher, and both the woman and the company. And so I'm wondering if you could just, because we've kind of gone into the work itself, but I would love it if you could lay the bedrock here for the listeners as to how you got to here. So what your journey looked like that made you the guy who found it essential to tell this story.
Yeah. It's a great question. It's a great question. I like how you asked it and what you're asking me to share. So, I came out. So I'm the son of third. I was supposed to be a 3rd generation truck driver. That did not happen. And I came out I came out as a gay man at 15. Started a gay and lesbian youth group for the city of Dayton, Ohio at 16. my 20s, so my teen years were very much being ostracized, being bullied, being an outcast. And at the same time, I had an inner strength where I was able to brush a lot of it off. Graduated 11th in my class. Got the hell out when I was 17. Moved to Chicago. I think my 20s were very much playing into the hypermasculine. It was playing into everything I thought I needed to be, everything I should be. From hypersexualization, hyper macho, hyper masculine, and it did not serve me at all.
Right.
But it gave me a journey that I think allows me to empathize with a lot of men.
Right.
In my 30s, I started to turn my life around. I think when I was 28, I was, struggling with a number of addictions. I was homeless at 28 before but the universe, there's something about the universe that, just no matter how bad it got, I could always pull out where I think a lot of people can't pull out. There was something that would give me the experiences and then I would pull out. And then then I became, a professor like 6 months later from that time. And so, and then I headed up a consulting division working with Wall Street clients, But it was my 40th birthday when I gave myself a birthday present and I resigned from my role heading up the consulting division because I told my CEO I lost my heart and soul on the job and I needed to move on. And there was, in each of these experiences, I should say this, when I would follow money, status, fame, title, I'd fall flat on my face within 6 months. Right? But when I would go back to the experience of starting the nonprofit or starting the Gay and Lesbian Youth Group, there's something about that always reminded me that I am driven by service. And there was something, I was writing vision and mission statements at 16 before I knew what they were, and setting up an infrastructure for Youth Quest, which was the name of the group, which is still around today, 30 something years later, serving all of Southwest Ohio.
Wow. From
Columbus to Cincinnati over to the Indiana border. So to be able to put an infrastructure and foundation in place from an idea, right? So that was all right, so there's something here. And every time I would go back and just get quiet, listen to my inner knowing, and make decisions from that place. And many of my decisions were very intentional based on that reflection. When I interviewed at Eileen Fisher, it was an 8-month interview. And I just knew, I'm supposed to get this job. It wasn't a question, right?
Yeah.
It was just unequivocal. I'm going to get this job. I think the pivotal moment of my life was then on my first day at Eileen Fisher. My two bosses sat me down after the 8-month interview and said to me, Sean, we just want to acknowledge that you have proven yourself in the interview. Now we want you to stop proving yourself and learn to be who you authentically are. So when you interview with us, you showed us your heart and you showed us your polish. We hired you for your heart and we want to see less of your polish. We want to see you unfiltered. And we're going to support you in that. And first of all, how many people get that opportunity in a company?
Right.
And how many men get that opportunity?
Right.
And then within 3 weeks, I remember being at Eileen's house in her living room. And it was an all-day, it was a 2-day experience, 2-day retreat. And about 3 hours then, I found myself doing interpretive dance to a poem about a bumblebee finding her nectar while drums were beating in the background. And my boss comes up to me and she's like, you're in a different world now, right? I was like, I think so. And I just kept surrendering into the experience and not judging it.
Right.
And just let myself experiment and play. And And that led me to, the facilitator of that experience. Then I just became a groupie, and then we ended up, I ended up spending Valentine's Day with her in Montreal. And next thing I know, I'm at the artist commune where she's doing a 5 weekends over 5 month program. And it was on that Sunday morning of the first weekend where I heard the call. Right. And so, I was like, I think I'm supposed to work with men. I don't want to, but I think I'm supposed to. And that was probably about 7 or 8 years ago. And from that point, I just kept leaning into this adventure, and that because there were so many spiritual teachers and guides at Eileen Fisher, and I knew as a systems thinker that if we want to reimagine our crumbling systems from a place of deeper consciousness, that the Achilles heel are men in power holding on to power from a place of wounding, not a place of healing. And to be able to put the attention on men around their healing, and in particular men in power. And I had no clue that the hypermasculine piece would come. Like, I just thought, I'm going to work with men, right, in seminary. But I knew that this work had to be done at a soul level, because what I learned in the facilitator training in Kingston was that the room can only go as deep as the facilitator is capable.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I was going to do the deep work with men, I had to go and do my deep work.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to seminary not because I'm overly religious or overly spiritual. I think I'm just spiritual enough to be dangerous. And at the same time, I went because I knew that I needed this if I was going to work with men.
Right.
And so I went through 2 years of seminary, and 2 days after saying my vows, I got a video. A buddy of mine sent me a video, and he said, I think they want you to call. I'm like, what are you talking about? And I looked at the video, and I just decided to move from East Harlem, New York to West Asheville, North Carolina. And it was a video it was the chief of police of the Asheville Police Department. So this was a few months after George Floyd, and they had come in militarized, destroyed a medic tent, and had a Black Lives Matter protest. And so this was a mea culpa. This was an apology. We screwed up. I screwed up. We could have handled it differently. If you want to be part of police reform efforts, we're looking for community members to get involved. And in seminary, they say, when you hear the call, you say yes no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
So I reached out the next morning, and my note really, I opened with I'm moving from East Harlem to West Asheville. And I said, my best friend in London, who's mixed race, will visit me in New York, but won't visit me in Asheville because he's afraid of being murdered by your police. And so I said, and that's where we were like 3 months in, right? So it was all fresh. Everything was happening.
Yeah.
And I said, I know that most officers are there to truly serve and protect, but all he sees in Europe is that our police kill black men. Mm-hmm. And women. Mm-hmm. So I said, because I can't assure him of his safety, I need to be part of this. Well, because of my credentials and background, and I became known as a facilitator from New York, I had a one-on-one with the chief of police, and he had 2 asks. Can you help me deepen the level of compassion among my officers? And can you create conversations between officers and community members that humanize each other for a new relationship going forward? And I said, yes. And so I came back, really put some thought into it. And because they lost so many officers due to resignations and retirements, early retirements, they didn't have the bandwidth to do this work. But a group of us started to form, and we then, by that, probably 3 or 4 months later, we formed something called Project Compassion, which was how do we deepen the level of compassion among police officers? and in police departments. And so we had members of the FBI. We had the former head of the National Academy of the FBI, Quantico. We had a Latina military officer who went to Stanford and was doing culture transformation work with military security forces. We had a culture analyst from Great Places to Work. I was a spiritual, let's talk about embodied compassion. And then we had someone who worked in administration with the Charlotte and Atlanta PD. And we all kind of organically found each other, came together, and started this initiative. And so that really kind of set the stage. I was like, oh, I guess I'm working with cops. Okay. And then I got the call to move to DC, and I was like, oh. Then I was like hearing from the NFL, and I was hearing from all these really hyper-masculine environments. I'm like, oh, this is who I'm working with. Okay. Didn't see this coming. And now it's just like, I think the journey has really been challenging me to strengthen my resilience and mature into the ability to really hold this work. And that was really the impetus for Warrior Compassion.
Wow.
How do we reach the audiences that are hardest to reach, hardest to love? And to be able to offer an invitation and a hand to heal, not a demand to change.
Yeah. I've really enjoyed just kind of listening the lead up to your work here. You've mentioned twice already that once you felt the call to work with men, you didn't want to.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious what you felt, your hesitation or your fear around, what made you think you didn't want to work with men? And then what did you notice as you started working with men?
I think for me, what was obvious was I was afraid of men. I was afraid of the men. I mean, I was, even when I was getting my high school diploma, like on stage, being called fucking faggot from the back of the auditorium.
Oh.
Right. And so, I mean, it was a different time. It was 1989, 1990, 1991. So, I hadn't healed a lot of the bullying and the ostracism, and I had a lot of preconceived ideas about men. I had a lot of preconceived about straight men.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just by easing in and doing it at a pace that, that's counter to let's just jump in, let me wade in slowly. And with each interaction, with each conversation, I started getting more comfortable. I started seeing how other men were perceiving me. I was seeing how the effect I was having on other men. I was, with each interaction, like the fear was starting to dissipate. Many men would surprise me. And so it was really challenging my own assumptions. And I think to really showcase how multifaceted we are. And that each time I had an idea of who someone was, they would prove me wrong. Right? Until I finally stopped having preconceived ideas about who they were and really had a curiosity about who they were and what made them tick and what were their values and what do they love. And, I got to tell you, like one of the last podcasts I did, I'm like a queer, progressive New Yorker minister. And the guy was like, Sean, I live in Montana. I'm an evangelical Christian, Republican, conservative. And once we named it, we were able to go to amazing places. We were able to really have deep conversations that choked both of us up. And the thoughts, the comments that he had at the end was, we went more places in this podcast than I've ever gone in any other podcast.
Wow.
And it was one of my favorite. For me, it was one of my favorites. And I find that we are so divided. We are so polarized. We have so many assumptions. We have so many judgments.
Mm-hmm.
And this work, when people ask me, because part of my work, I've had my share of encounters with white nationalists, far right extremists, and I was like, oh, this is my audience. Okay, like I'm working with people who would want me dead. Okay, cool, got it. And the feedback I often get from across the board is that I'm non-threatening, and people feel safe opening up.
Yeah.
And often when I'm in other communities, or if I'm in conversations around inclusion or justice or social justice, I'm like, I'm separating it out. I'm like, that's work that can be done later, but for this audience, or for the men that I work with, the men I serve, you got to separate them out. It's about witnessing. It's about creating space. It's about offering an invitation. It's not having any other agenda, and not because regardless of if you have an agenda or not, if you have one, they're going to feel it, and they're not going to open up.
Yeah, totally.
And it's an energy, and I think going back to where we started, just the comments about the masculine, feminine, or around the feminine. I think part of it is doing the work of the integrated masculine, feminine, or the integration. And then energetically, I just possess a different energy that they're drawn to.
Right.
And I think they don't often understand why. And it's either the energy they're attracted to, their soul is calling to their soul is calling them to this. And honestly, at this point, I have no other agenda in this than grounding it from a place of love, compassion, and deeper humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that when I talk from a place of humanity and compassion, or compassionate humanity, it opens the doors, and we're able to go many places. And, I've been doing this 7 or 8 years. I've not had one person object. I've ever had the pushback. The only place I get cynical questions is usually other gay men. And part of it, I'm also just like, yeah, and that's not my audience. It's like, what I realized, in particular, ultimately I want to support all men, but I take a very different approach. And I cater to a particular subset of the male population. And, I think it is rare from a platonic standpoint for a man to hold another place from a place of unconditional love.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, yeah.
You feel it.
Mm-hmm.
I know, as an openly queer identified man, how that informs my doing the work with other men, and how that informs my approaches and my expectations and things like that. And I'm curious about your experience as an openly gay identified man. How does that inform your work? How does that inform your approaches? Does it even, as I think might be the case for me, that it made it easier for me to embrace masculine and feminine, right, because I didn't feel a lot of the constrictions that I think straight men feel. And so I'm curious what your experience is as a gay man, because it's funny. You had said, where you get the most pushback is from cynical gay men. And I'm like, he's going to think I'm guilty, but I'm not cynical at all. I actually, I really love what you're doing. And so that was the question. That was the door that you opened that I wanted to continue to walk through.
Yeah. No, I think it's, I'm very well aware that there are few of us that are openly gay men who are in this space with primarily straight men. And I say every time I'm in these conversations with other gay men who lead this work or facilitate this work or coach in this work, that we bring just a different level of awareness, and we see the world differently. One, I think, first and foremost and most obvious is we understand the oppression in a different way and what it means to be oppressed.
Yeah.
I think second, many of us have been on the outside living a false narrative and a false truth to be able to be accepted and not get killed, not get murdered, not be abused.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think we see the work differently. I think when we've done our work to be able to overcome our shit, our wounds, we have a different level of compassion. And so I think it's just we have a compassionate depth to us. And then I think, to your point, the balancing of the masculine and feminine. I came out at 15, so I often think, well, I've dealt with so much of this stuff early in my life that now it just is more of a way of being than it is anything else. Yeah. And I will strategically, out myself or not, depending on who I'm with and my level, my feelings of safety, or use it strategically as a teachable moment. So it's not like I'm walking around branded as a gay man, but it's like, but I'll tell you my story. I'll tell you about my boyfriend. It's just very matter of fact and I think it also offers just an invitation to be non-threatening. And also I think for me, I've gone through so many hardships and so many challenges over the course of my life that has just, once I was able to heal and get over my resentments and get over my judgments and get over my, my masks and trying to be, I think so much of this is the journey to acceptance. And as we can accept ourselves and for all parts of ourselves.
Yeah.
Then it becomes easier to accept others and other men. Yeah.
So it was it was kind of a two-tiered thing. I had to overcome my fear of men because, like you, I was afraid of men because I had every reason to be afraid of men. I mean, aside from the fact that I grew up in a violent household where the men were violent, my father and brothers were violent people. Society at large told me as a gay man that men were to be feared. And so once I got past that in doing this work, then there was this other tier that I had to get past. And that was, am I suspect? Are my motives suspect? Do straight guys look at me and say, well, you as a gay man have an ulterior motive for wanting to get emotional with me, physical with me. There's a reason that you love to hug the guys you work with, right? That there's sort of an accusation behind this. And that was all coming from me because no straight guy that I've ever worked with, not once in the time I've been doing this work, has ever said that to me.
No.
And I'm wondering if that is a fear that you ever had or something that ever reared its head, or if in fact a guy has ever said to you, as a gay man, I can't feel safe around you.
So I think I think there were times early on I had a lot of questions. And I asked myself, what are my motivations? Am I doing this because I just want to meet a bunch of guys? Right. And I think the spiritual maturity that came with this was that the more I could accept, the less I had attachment, the less I needed anything, and could just be with what is. So I think there was whatever toxicity, whatever wounds, whatever was inside of me, just, worked themselves out. And so everything, I think, in my mind, timing, this is all divine orchestration, divine timing, and I've just been on stepping into the different opportunities, stepping into the different tasks to be able to continue to refine and do my healing. So by the time that I'm now here, from my own perspective, that's there. It's not even a question. It's not on the table. There is no ulterior motive or agenda.
Right.
Flip side, though, I actually have never had anyone say that.
Yeah.
you know,
Neither have I.
never had anyone say that.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's people can feel into it. They can feel like, do they feel safe with you or not?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
They might be confused by me. Like they don't understand.
Well, I like
You
to
know,
hope that people are confused by me. So,
you know, the one thing I'll say when I started with the police team, our police team, there's one guy on the team, the former head of the National Academy of the FBI, and you know he was pretty much my complete opposite. Like, you know, cop, military, cop, FBI agent, head of the FBI Academy. You know, like conservative Christian. And I was like, oh, we're not going to get along. So like, and I said, you know what? Let me just reach out to him and say, hey, I think we should have a conversation. And so he agreed, and I thought we'd have like a 20-minute conversation. He kept me on the phone for 2.5 hours, asking questions, and at the end, I'm talking like, yeah, I'm gonna help you, help police get in touch with their feminine and come into their full humanity. Not one objection. Right. And he said at the end, he's like, Sean, I can't, I've listened to you for 2.5 hours. I can't argue, refute, or rebut anything you've just said. He said, you're not, and I think this is the essence of it. He said, you're not training cops to be better cops. You're developing officers into better humans. Who can argue with that?
yeah.
And I think that just epitomized what people see, how they receive it, and they understand the intentions. It's a different approach and a different way of being.
Yeah.
And also I think I've been able to own that I'm not like most guys. Like I see the world differently. I have a depth to me. I have I've walked the path. I've gone through hell. And all of it, as I did some shadow work way back in the day, and it was like my mantra was, I'm a man who is healing, who's here to help other men heal. Pure and simple. Pure and simple.
Yeah, I want to pause right there, and I've been just trying to like soak in. You mentioned that the feedback you've gotten, Sean, is that you are non-threatening. You're safe for people to open up around and with. And I'm pausing here just to honor everything that you've put into this. And like there's with everything that you've been through, there's a lot of ways that you could have gone. But the way that you went, the way that you chose to dive in and go with this, even though, initially there was fear around what it might be for you. It's very encouraging, very heartwarming. And honestly, I'm very, very grateful for your story and the impact that you've had on so many people.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I appreciate that reflection.
When you go into these hypermasculine communities, the NFL, police, whatever, what's the hardest thing that you encounter? What is the most difficult part of bringing these men? I was going to use the word elevate, but I'm not sure if that's the right word or not, but bringing these men forward into a different understanding of their compassion. What's the hardest part? How does it even, where do you begin with some guys?
I don't think about it that way.
Okay.
I don't think about it in those terms. I'm really of the belief that those who need or are ready to hear me will be able to hear me.
Mm-hmm.
And that my presence, first, beyond my words, I'm offering an energetic imprint that's planting seeds. And that this person, because I've planted my seeds, right, they'll germinate in this person's life when they're meant to germinate. Mm-hmm. So I don't hold that I expect to see change. I don't hold that they're going to get it. I mean, my reputation is, I'll make your head hurt. I'll get you to think. I'll get you to think about things from a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
It may be very curious to you around what it is I'm talking about. And when you're ready, you'll get it when you get it, if you're going to get it.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I was doing my first master's in organization development, take a class, and it wasn't until halfway through the next semester that I actually like figured out what we just did in the class before. You know? And I think there's something to that. Like Sean said X, and it may make sense to them, 6 months down the road.
Right.
Right. And I'm just like, I'm just going to put it out there. I'm going to put out there what I see. I'm going to be a mirror for people, for men. I'm going to keep it real. I'm going to keep it honest. And so sometimes they're just there, I have a friend of mine in particular, and he's often puzzled, and I'm like, it becomes hard to explain like what it is I do, because I'm like, it's just a way of being. It's like I've been on a journey that just opens doors and things just happen, and there's spirituality to it. And he kind of understands over time, or he gets parts of it. And so I think the biggest thing for me is to be patient and to be non-attached.
Mm-hmm.
And to model what it's like to walk from a place of my authentic truth, which I think is why we're here, right? Talking about that kernel right there.
That is supposedly the kernel of the show. Yeah. That is supposedly what we specialize in here. Yeah. And in fact, since you opened the door, normally I save this until later in the show, but what the hell, you opened the door. We have 2 questions that we ask every guest. Mm-hmm. And since you are here now, it's your turn. And I'm only going to ask the first of the 2. I'll ask the second one later. But the first question is, what does the word authenticity mean to you?
That's so funny. I'm about to lead a training, and we open with a Simon Sinek quote on authenticity. Asking, it's like a long quote, but the way I define the work is our journey is to discover our truth beyond the protective layers, beyond the ego, and beyond the wounds. Mm-hmm. The next part is then to strive to see others in their truth, beyond the protective layers, beyond the wounds, beyond the mask. Mm-hmm. And then the work is then to accept that our truths are true, and that one truth is not better than the other. And how can we sit in the complexity of our truths? Mm-hmm. And come to a place that I can accept your truth, even if I'm diametrically opposed in my views to your truth, right? That I can accept it because that's your truth. Mm-hmm. And so I think authenticity in me is to walk from that place. Authenticity in me is to do the work to understand what my past experience and my conditioning and my teachings have brought me to a place of my constructed identity versus my authentic identity, right? And the permission to live in that authentic identity versus the mask of what I've constructed, so I can be socially, appropriate and acceptable. Mm-hmm. And I think, it's funny, I hear so much around like, okay, we're going to create human-centered workplace design. I'm often like, are you really? Like, do you know what you're asking? do you know what you're actually putting out there? Have you designed an organization and the systems to be able to support people in their true authenticity, right? Without saying that's culturally a fit or not, as a way to then determine. So I don't think we're there. I don't think people really understand what it means to bring that humanity. And, if we're agitated within ourselves and we're walking around with the mask, becomes very difficult to be able to ask others to take their masks off if we can't do it ourselves.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Wow. Beautiful. Such a great response to that question.
Mm-hmm.
And I've now asked that question dozens of times. And that might be one of the broadest ranging and fully considered answers I've ever gotten to the question. Thank you for that.
What can I ask? What do you normally hear?
Well, I mean, honestly, the variety of responses is sort of shocking. I keep saying one day I'm going to take all of the responses and put them into a book and just put out the Authenticity Road podcast guide to authenticity. Because everyone's got a different view of it. I mean, there's always a common thread. And I think you named the common thread with my constructed identity versus my authentic identity.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the commonality, I think, between all of the answers. But obviously, because they're filtered through all of these different experiences, the ways they're expressed are wildly varied. And so I have no usual answer. I can't say, oh, I normally hear X and you gave me Y. It's like I normally hear A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, and you gave me K.
Got it.
One thing that's been kind of burning since the start of our episode here, you mentioned that your time at Eileen Fisher, men would start to open up, and a lot of reflections or things shared was, my girlfriend noticed this, my partner noticed this. And you also mentioned that everybody has this tenderness, this compassionate side within us already. It's just learning to access it and execute with it. Is there to you a point of like a transformation where there's all of these external validations shifting to an internal where men are now saying, I noticed that I am more well-versed with my emotions. I'm more comfortable with my emotions. Shifting that outside what people are saying about me to now I'm noticing it and expressing it from, my own vantage point.
I think first, we're not used to getting that type of feedback from others. Right? So I think it's stirring the pot right out of the gate. What do you mean I listen differently? What do you mean? Like, what is that? What do you mean, right? And they're hearing it often from someone very close to them that they either can or can't hear. They'll often respect and notice it. I think like once you start planting those seeds, then it becomes on your radar, right? And then you just start noticing. I think there is something though, I don't think as men in general, we're conditioned to look within. Right? In certain communities of men, it's like that's viewed as that's weak. Others, it's too feminine.
Right.
Yeah.
Others, it's gay. It's like whatever the perception is, right? And so, I want to go back to what you said earlier. Jordan, when you're talking about we want the quick fix, we want the 1, 2, and 3 goals, right? That's not how this works.
Right.
There are enough teachers and guides and coaches that are really good at that. And you've noticed that I'm walking the time, like it's sharing what I've walked, and it is not quick. It's nuanced.
Yeah.
It's not easy. It's painful, and that's why I think it's before you even go on the journey, how do you anchor yourself so you can really go on the journey? And I don't think it's linear. I think it's spherical. I think you're going to repeat certain things again and again and again and again until you get it. You're going to beat your head against the wall again and again and again and again until you're like, oh, all right, let me Let me really look at that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's a moment of transformation. From what I've seen, I think each person's individual. And my goal is not to see the transformation. My goal is to be able to plant as many seeds as possible, so that there is a different level of knowing and awareness that a different way is possible, and that these men have an opportunity to come into their own in a new way.
Right. Yeah, to come into their own. You're planting seeds for them to then use to become themselves. Like you can't teach every man to become Sean. It's planting seeds to, be their own authentic self.
Yeah, and I think for each man it's different.
For sure.
And I think part of it is to honor one's own journey, one's own experience, one's own, who they are. And I often say it's, when I really spell it out, it's, helping men discover their truth, and then more, if not more important, to learn to love the truth of who they are. To realize their inherent gifts, and to see the ways they are being called to contribute in the world.
Sean, I want to bring up that. Well, first of all, a link to the book will be in the show notes, so folks can find the book. But I also really, really encourage anybody listening to check out your website, to check out the Warrior Compassion website, because as I look at all of the things that you do, you really make me feel like a slug. You have got your hands into so many different areas and so many different ways of bringing this healing to men. The outdoor adventures and the facilitator boot camp and the I just went blank on the name of your studio, Symponia Studio. And I don't really have a question around this other than just, it feels to me like the book was a natural outgrowth of all of these other avenues that you go down with men. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the other things that you do, the other ways that you bring this healing to the community of men.
Yeah, I think, so when I was living in DC, I mean, I love working in DC. It was very hard for me to live in DC. I moved there when I was 47, 48. So, it would have been a different experience if I would have moved there in my 20s or early 30s.
Yeah.
And so in some ways I felt invisible in a very youth-centric, very political, highly transactional city. Right. And there was a lot of, pride in atheism. So it's like to be a minister and separation of church and state. I'm like, all right. But what I did is I was really lonely, and I said, you know what? I'm just going to create community because, let me just try this thing I've been thinking about. And so I started with men's soul adventures. So I put a meetup group out in DC, and I was like, yeah, let's just see if anyone even wants to do this. Within 24 hours, 52 men signed up.
Wow.
By the time I left DC, 180 men were in the group.
Amazing.
And basically it's just, free 3-hour experiences where we go in nature, we have deeper male bonding, and we have soul connecting conversations. And what I found is a lot of guys, they're not ready to go to an ashram or go down to Asheville and live with shamans and mystics. But they have practical questions. What's the difference? There's a lot of religious trauma, that a lot of men are operating from. They don't really see themselves in the spiritual community. And yet at the same time, there's a craving for it, a deeper level. And there's a permission to be able to ask and have these conversations. And so I found that Soul Ventures is really kind of the core to just create the invitation and to go and just have some deep conversations. Sometimes I'll just say, what does the word soul mean to you? Might do some embodiment or some somatic work together outside in nature. We might just connect with nature. The men's studio, that's a work in progress. And so that, I've been thinking about the men's studio since I started on this path, and it wasn't until I finished the book that I'm like, now I can see the framework that for a 4 to 5 day experience, each section of the book can then become a day. I've also always thought about, that I wanted whitewater rafting as part of the retreats, because I think what better experience to demonstrate surrendering into the unknown and letting go of control than the metaphor of, okay, what just happened on the river? Who was really in control?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I do coaching. I do coaching with men, and I call it spiritually grounded coaching for men. Because I think in a lot of men's communities, it's either overtly spiritual or religious, or there's none of it. And I'm like, okay, there's got to be something that just is an invitation into it in a non-scary, non-dogmatic, non-overbearing way, to be able to talk about, let's talk about what is our landscape, and part of that is our spiritual well-being, right? And to be able to just have an exploration of that. And I've been able to connect with folks who are Jewish, folks who are Muslim, for folks who are Hindu, folks who are Buddhist or Buddhist, and folks that are Christian, folks that are evangelical, and they can find themselves in. And I often can also connect with the atheist, agnostic, and spiritual, not religious. And often for those who are atheists, I'm like, cool. My question though is often, I really understand what you don't believe in, but I'm really curious what you do believe in. And usually when we find what they do believe in, then we can really start tapping into, so what are your core beliefs? What are those deep values? If it's secular humanism, or it's like, I believe in nature, or, whatever it is, it's like that is something that can guide you. And so I often say that these conversations are the philosophical, existential, or spiritual discussions that men want to have, wherever they are. And my second master's was in existential psychotherapy, so I was on the path before I knew I was on the path.
Wow, just hearing about this is kind of making me hungry. It's making me hungry to want to have these deeper conversations. Jordan, what do you have?
I don't know that I have, maybe it'll formulate, I don't know that I have a question in particular, but when 2 weeks ago, I was out on a backpacking trip with my older brother, and I made a point to make sure I could try to skim through the book a little bit while I was out. And I have the two things that really, I highlight stuff on the Kindle app, and the two things, and we can follow this wherever it goes, but just really wowing to me was what you mentioned about loneliness and its effects. Men who are lonely and socially disconnected. I think there was a study that you referenced, being socially disconnected is the equivalent to smoking 13, 15 cigarettes or something a day. And I know you hit on it as doing kind of like the pre-grounding work, being involved with some kind of a men's community. But that really, like, I had to stop, and I remember I read it 2 or 3 times, and then I mentioned that to my brother, who was sitting in his chair just a couple of feet away. And He's like, well, where did you get that from? I'm like, well, it's, this book that I'm skimming through here. And it's just, I've always understood that stress leads to premature death. And, I guess loneliness could be linked to that. But it never really landed home to me until I read that. Like, just loneliness by itself and the sheer effect that it can have on a man.
I feel that.
Yeah.
I often say this is the journey for so many men from disconnection, isolation, and loneliness to deeper connection, intimacy, and love.
Mm.
And there's that piece that I share later on in the book that, as men, it's often the intimacy we yearn for, the love we misunderstand, and the sex that we settle for.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever that looks like, for men. But the thing that eludes many of us is a real sense of intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
And an intimacy romantically, but also an intimacy among men.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Platonic intimacy among men.
Right.
Yeah.
To really see each other, to really connect, to really have that sense of brotherhood, to really be able to go deep, and to really support. And one of the things that I find even among guys who lead men's work is that we can talk a good game around collaboration and connection and community, and we still suck at it. When it really comes down to it, it's like, but are we really? Are we really? We're espousing it, but are we really embodying it? Right? And it's something I think that's one of the biggest things our conditioning holds us back from. Is that sense of connection, that sense of moving from competition to collaboration.
Yeah.
Sharing, playing, connecting, being open and honest with each other, and expressing. It's there's a point in my book where I define compassion from 8 different faith traditions. So what do the Christians say? What do the Jews say? What do the Muslims say? What do the Sufis say? Buddhists, Hindus, shamans. And I do that because I find that there's often still that, I can't express emotion. I can't, you can't be compassionate until you can feel and experience compassion. You can't intellectualize your way.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And so when anyone gives me the, this is a sign of weakness, or men just don't do that, or, that becomes so trite to me at this point.
Right.
So that's why I said, well, what about all of your spiritual teachers and religious leaders and gods? And then prophets, every faith tradition has some dimension of compassion, some dimension of service, some dimension of, letting go of ego disillusion, some form. And so I just wanted to anchor it in this goes way deeper. This is who we are soulfully, as opposed to just this idea that we can just disregard because our conditioning pushes it away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, to Jordan's point about loneliness, I think that until I discovered this community of men, until I began to I shouldn't even say discover, but until I began to operate within this community of men, I think that I was lonely in a way that I did not know that I was lonely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that now I have friendship, connection, brotherhood in ways that I never did in my, 50 plus years before I found this. And I am much happier now. I feel healthier now. I really do. So I am on board with all of that. Sean, it is time for the second question.
Mhm.
And the second question, it's kind of your opportunity to freestyle. Second question is, what is it that you wish we had asked you that we didn't?
Hmm.
And the other way to think about the question is, what is the thing that you would most wish to say that you haven't had the opportunity yet to say? Two sides of the same question. Okay.
I think the first, I had two thoughts.
Okay.
Okay, the first was coming back to the word love. And what's at the root of love? You know, why is love so central to this journey? The second thought that came to mind was, so what's the point of all this? What's the impact? What's the potential impact? What's the possibility that comes from engaging men around this?
Yeah. I want to hear the answers to both of those questions because they're both essential to what we do here.
You know, I think not simply put, but simply put, you know, love to me in this context is helping men learn to love themselves, self-love, not self-care, not self-compassion, but to really get to the heart of what it means to love freely, to love fully, to love unconditionally.
What does it mean to love? What does love mean? Because I can't define it. You know, if you were to ask me that question, I don't have a good answer to that question. And I'm hoping maybe you do, because I am always saying about how deep my love is and how much I love, and how that I am always striving to maintain unconditional love for every creature, just by virtue of the fact that it exists. But I don't have a good definition of what that word love means. I just know what I feel. When I say the word love, I know what that means to me internally. Can you express, can you vocalize what your definition of love is?
I don't know if words do it justice.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But what I can tell you is the moment I experienced it for the first time in my life was that moment when my father asked me to feed him. 2 days before he went into hospice.
Yeah.
And the the care with each spoonful and each bite. And the forgiveness, the acceptance, and the care.
Yeah.
All of that. You know, and I often say, you know, in that journey with my dad, the forgiveness was so powerful that it allowed him to die in peace, and it allowed me to start living my life.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a feeling, it's an experience.
Yeah.
It's I think the word that was coming is it's selflessly giving without selfishness.
And so then how do we give that to ourselves?
Right.
How, I mean, and I'm not really asking the question. I'm just, because discovering a method of self-love was what opened the door for me to love others.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And so bringing this work to men so that they can love themselves is it's funny. I am not a religious person, but I am called to a life of service. I feel a call to a life of service. And I will frequently refer to men's work as my ministry, not in the sense that it is religious, but in the sense of the word to minister, to give aid and comfort, right? To minister to someone's wounds. Right? And that helping someone locate that method of self-love is a ministry. You know, it's ministering to their wounds. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get off onto a preachy off ramp here, but but it's just, this is all just coming up for me now as you're talking. And then the second half was what is essential about bringing this work, I think was your second question.
What's the possibility? What's the potential impact?
Yeah.
You know, but what I want to just, before I answer that, just take a step back and say, you know, in seminary, they would say minister as a verb, right? And then when people ask me, what's your congregation? What church are you at? I'm like, I'm not. Like, I'm ministering each time to be really, to witness and be with, not to fix, not to be the savior, not to be anything other than I'm gonna walk alongside you on this journey. And what will be revealed, you know? And so I think, to the other point, what's possible, you know? Earlier on in this journey, I probably had a lot more ego, you know, to say, you know, and I had a vision, and I remember my Akashic reader, was an Akashic Records reader at Eileen Fisher, and I share this in the book. But at one point, she said, "Sean, it's great that you have a vision and a plan. Now I want you to walk out of your masculine and into your feminine, and walk from a place of curiosity and wonderment, and let go of the need to control the outcome." You know. And now I can safely say I'm pretty much doing that. Right? I'm pretty much don't really have a vision, don't have a plan, just kind of like, okay, what does the universe have for me today? Where are we going? So before I had a vision for what the possibility is, but of what it would look like, you know. And instead of having a vision, I have a North Star. That I hold loosely and then follow the spiritual breadcrumbs to see what's going to manifest. Right? But the North Star is, as more men come into their healing, they're going to start to experience themselves differently. They're going to start experiencing their relationships differently. They're going to start leading differently. Because at the epicenter of all of this is love. And love is a vibration. You know, whenever anyone asks me, you know, what is spirituality? The reflection is love. You know? It's no more, no less. And I think as we move, you know, I think we're in a movement from fear-based control to love-based liberation. Right, and we're in the dance of the ego between the need for control and the permission to let go. And the more we can bring love to the hate, love to the fear, love to the anger, love to the rage, and to hold all of our shadow from a place of love. And I think ultimately for most men, the point of devastation for a lot of men is their shame.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so to bring love to the shame, to dissipate the shame, to break all of it down, men will walk from a place of joy.
Mm-hmm.
My shamanic journey, my first weekend in seminary, and we did our non-medicinal shamanic journeys. And I got the vision. I got the vision for what this is.
Yeah.
And there were 3 things that were essential. 1, to model a new way of being. 2, to come back to that place of play and seeing the world with childlike wonder. And 3, to heal through the feminine, to strengthen the masculine. And that the feminine will heal the shadow.
Yeah.
The shadow will dissipate, and what's left will leave men in a place of calm, joy, peace.
Wow.
Beautiful.
I think that is a spectacular way to end our conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So, Sean, you and I have never spoken. I did not know what to expect from you. Normally, I do a pre-interview with a guest where we kind of, meet for 20, 30 minutes and whatever. And I didn't even do that with you. I just said, oh, Sean will be good.
Well, you're Facebook friends. Why
and we're
bother?
Facebook friends. And you clicked like on my soup recipe today. I had put up a picture of a bowl of soup that I made, and you clicked like on that. I'm like, oh, that's cute. No, but seriously, I had no idea what to expect. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know the first thing about you, other than the fact that we were Facebook friends. But for this past 90 minutes that we've been sitting here talking, I have been sitting in this place of I'm actually getting chilled as I say this, a place of such gratitude and feeling wrapped in such grace. And also what I have loved, maybe even what I've loved most about this conversation, is that you keep saying things that are things that I say. And I'm like, good grief. Like, other people are saying the same things I'm saying. And just like a lot of the vocabulary you're using is around the journey that I've been on this past. I mean, Jordan, I think you would agree with me that there's been a shift in my journey over the past year, 9 months, something.
Yeah,
my journey shifted.
Sure.
And I became much more peaceful and much more loving and much more open and much more in a state of surrender and much more in a state of allowing. And so as we sat here talking and you were saying all of these things, I was just kind of getting these little thrills, these little chills of thrill down my spine of oh my God, this is what this looks like. As I look at you and I look at your journey, and I look at the work that you're doing, and I look at the accomplishments that you're having in this field, I'm saying, yes, this is the fruit of this. This is what this looks like. And that just makes me so excited and joyful. And so I have just been in, as I said, in a state of gratitude and felt wrapped in grace as we have sat here with you tonight. Jordan, any last words?
I share the gratitude. Thank you so much, Sean, for not only everything that you've done outside of this conversation, but everything that you brought to the conversation. You know, hearing Ettore share just now, all I can say is, you know, the feeling that we're all having right now is what's possible when the work is done and you move through into the real stuff, the real way to experience life. We can sit and just enjoy something like this together. So very, very filled with gratitude.
I just want to say that and two things are coming up. One, just the word humility. Getting to that place of humility in the journey.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But the second, it goes back to sort of the impact. But I think it's connected to what you all are doing as well with the journey, where you're taking men. Is that as we walk this path, as we invite other men to walk this path, you'll start to shift vibration. You'll start to shift energy, right?
Absolutely.
You'll start to have a light to you that is a beacon and attractive to other people.
Yeah.
And I think part of, so it's not surprising what you were just sharing, in that, yeah, we're using similar language. And part of that is, and we're starting to find each other.
Right.
Our beacons are all finding each other.
Yeah.
You know, we're finding others who are operating and connecting at that level, because we need each other, and we need to. I think the challenge is when we get so caught up in the depths that we can go, that we only want to be in those depths.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And part of, I think, our responsibility is then to swim to the shallow end and invite others along, but to be nourished in those depths with others who get what we're talking about.
Yep.
And start to formulate what the possibilities can be together.
Yeah.
Right. And so, yeah, we met on Facebook. I probably said we had mutual connections or something. And I'm like, Facebook suggests you meet this person. I probably said, hey,
okay, whatever.
There was the way you just reached out. I was like, oh yeah, this makes sense. And then when I looked at your website, I'm like, oh yeah, this makes sense.
Yeah.
Like I don't question it anymore. I'm just like, oh yeah, who I'm meant to meet when I'm meant to meet them will just show up when it's time.
Yeah.
You know? And the more I continue walking the path, you know, what's interesting is each time I complete a task on the journey, it's sort of like the doors open to the next realm of the journey. You know, and what I've realized is, as I continue to walk, some people will fall away because our resonance no longer is in tandem and connected. And it's making space for others to come in at a different energy, a different vibration, a different connection, a different level of authenticity, and a different level of knowing.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're going to keep finding each other. And I think the only real responsibility we have in that is to keep doing our work.
Yeah.
To keep striving and keep seeking to greater depths of authenticity. I think to refine and realize the places where we're still wounded, the places where we're still in our stuff.
Yeah.
You know, because more and more will show up and be revealed. You know.
Yes, it will.
As we, I often call it whack-a-mole, as I said in the book. You know,
That's awesome.
Something else pops up, and it's like, boom, okay, let's pop it. You know, and so that's why I say we're never healed. We're always on a journey of healing.
Yeah.
Until the day we're no longer here.
Wow.
Love it.
All right. Well, I can see by the clock on the wall that we are well past our time together and that our journey has come to an end. Once again, Sean Harvey, the author of Warrior Compassion, who can be found at warriorcompassion.com. The link to the book and the link to the website will be in the show notes. And so it is time for us to throw the bags in the back of the jalopy and get back out onto the authenticity road. And so on behalf of the show, I am Ator.
I'm Jordan.
And until we meet again, please be authentic. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe so you're notified when a new episode is posted.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope what you've heard will help you on the road to your personal authenticity.
Visit us at www.authenticityroad.online.